In the previous video, we got the Kubota diesel-powered Honda Insight to move under its own power for the first time, and this of course is a major milestone in the project, and in theory there isn't much left to do in order to get the car roadworthy. Well, let's see about that. Anyway, our little Honda's back in the workshop so we can start to focus on all the little details to make this car both safe and reliable. Now, I love diesels, but I can't stand the smell of them, so today we're going to need to start building a complete exhaust system to help keep the stink behind the car. Normally that's not a super huge project, however we're going to fabricate the exhaust to fit the car in such a way that we'll still be able to use this custom aluminum belly pan. All of a sudden this just got a lot harder. Now, this aluminum belly pan is something we were able to purchase a few years ago for this project, and it really seems to help with the aerodynamics underneath the car. You know, the aerodynamics on this little Honda are a bit extreme from the factory, and in my opinion, the car looks goofy. Yeah, every time I say something like that, it makes people upset, but I can't help it, the car looks weird. Anyway, the belly pan enhances the aerodynamics without making the car look any weirder, so if we can, we're going to try to keep it. Now, we certainly have our work cut out for us, but let's make it a little bit more harder. Alright, let's take a look at a scene from the beginning of the video. And pause. So as you can see, this car already has an exhaust system. Well, that's nice. Let me click on play and we can see a little bit more. Okay, pause. And well, the lighting sucks. Let me brighten it up a bit. So you still can't see much, but right here is where the fuel tank is supposed to be, and I'll help you out. There is no fuel tank. Instead, there's an exhaust system occupying that space. So it looks like we'll have to get rid of the exhaust that's already on the car, then install the fuel tank, and then fabricate a new exhaust to clear the fuel tank. The good news is, this is a genuine Honda Insight fuel tank, and I have to thank fellow YouTuber 100% Jake for donating this ultra rare part. So making a custom exhaust isn't as bad as I make it sound. Basically the hardest part is connecting this cast iron exhaust manifold to these pipes right here. And to do that we'll have to fabricate a flange. After that we'll snake the exhaust tubing around the engine and try to keep it as close as possible without actually touching anything like the oil pan, for instance. So we're going to make this flange from a 1/4 inch thick steel plate. Now, this is a heavy duty chunk of steel and it ain't easy to work with. Probably most people would try and trace the shape of this exhaust flange gasket onto the steel and cut it out. Well, it ain't that easy with a 1/4 inch piece of steel. So we're going to use this 3D printed exhaust flange template tool. I've used this tool in the previous videos, and this tool will help us fabricate the steel flange on my lathe, which is the only piece of equipment I have to make precision parts like this. Now, I'm sure there are other ways to make this flange, however, I don't have the necessary tools to do it any other way. So to begin with, I need to find a good center on this scrap piece of steel, and that looks pretty good. Let me drill a small hole here and I'll be right back. Okay, so the hole is drilled, and now I can slip a tiny screw in the hole. Now, this screw will hold the 3D printed template in place, so I can mark all the locations that will need to be drilled. Now, after the holes are marked, I can go back and use a more robust center punch to provide a good starting point for the drill. Now, the purpose of this thingy is so I can draw a circle on a steel plate with a Sharpie. That looks like crap, but you get the idea. Anyway, let me mark these holes a little bit better. Okay, now we can try our best to cut this circle out with an angle grinder. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just close enough. And that's close enough. Ow, that's hot. Well, now we need to drill the center hole out for this large bolt. So this large bolt is temporary, and it's just the way they mount the steel plate in the lathe. You'll see in a moment or so. Okay, so now we have the steel plate in the lathe, we can do a better job at cutting this chunk of steel into a perfect circle. Yeah, that looks good. Off camera, I drilled the other 4 holes to size, and now we have to open up the center hole to 50mm or about 2 inches. I found a huge drill bit in my box of tools, or as some would call it, a toolbox. Anyway, this huge drill bit will get the hole started, and then we'll need to figure out a way to make the hole bigger. Now, I'm not actually a machinist, but I play one on YouTube. Normally I would use a boring bar to open up this hole, but for reasons I did this instead. So I have a standard tool thingy mounted upside down, and I'm spinning the chuck backwards. Yeah, well, some heads will explode, I'm sure, but this seems to work pretty good. Well, there you have it. Despite doing everything wrong or half-assed, this flange came out perfect. The hole in the center of this flange is 50mm or about 2 inches, and that's so we can run the biggest downpipe that's conceivably possible. Anyway, now we can weld in this adapter, and for that we'll be welding it on the inside of the flange. Of course, that's going to screw everything up, and after we weld the flange, we'll have to take it to the belt sander and clean up all the welds. It'll be fine. But before we do anything, I need to make this round flange square, and to do that I'll use this 3D printed template to mark where I need to cut the flange. Off camera, I cut the flange square. Now on the back side of the flange you can see where we machined the groove, and that's so we can weld on this side and have excellent weld penetration. Okay, before we can fully weld this flange, I need to do a couple of tack welds to hold everything in place. So the MIG welder that we're using has issues on thicker steel, and I found that for something like this it really helps to preheat everything for a perfect weld. So give me a few minutes and I'll get this stuff hot, and then we can start welding. Fast forward a couple of hours, and I guess someone forgot to film a whole bunch of stuff, but the good news is the downpipe is finished. Now it was a bit tricky to build this, and we did end up using a hammer to, massage the pipe for a better fit. Overall, this pipe came out really nice. Now on this end of the pipe, we welded in a V-clamp flange, and that's so we can have a quick release clamp so we can easily disconnect this from the rest of the exhaust system. This downpipe, well, it's a bit oversized, and the purpose of all that is to make the exhaust system turbo friendly. Now on the Saturn we found out the turbo really liked the bigger downpipe. Of course we ain't putting a turbo on this engine right away. For boost, we're going to try a supercharger this time around and see if that's a better solution for a small displacement diesel engine like this. We'll get into all that in a future episode. In order to get the downpipe to hug the engine as close as possible, we had to carve out a section of this engine torque mount, and while we were modifying the mount, we went ahead and added some reinforcements. Yep, it's a tight fit. Now when we had this engine in the Saturn, we discovered that the exhaust, well, it gets hot as you would expect, but it doesn't get real hot. Now perhaps it'll be a different story with the belly pan in place, but for now, we're confident that nothing's going to get seriously hot, but only time will tell. Let's put all this crap on the car and see how it all fits. So the lower torque mount's in place, and it fits really well with all the extra reinforcement steel. And now let's slide the downpipe in place. On a custom pipe like this, it's nice when it actually slides into position without a lot of drama. Not too shabby. So far everything looks fine. Let's take a look underneath the car. Okay, for now we're using a hose clamp as an exhaust hanger, and this actually may be permanent. I'm not sure yet. The flex joint on the exhaust will be on the other side of this pipe, and on this pipe it's probably okay just to anchor the exhaust here. The rest of the exhaust is pretty much a straight shot with a minor detour around the fuel tank. And speaking about the fuel tank, I reckon we need to install it before we go any further. The original fuel pump that came with this tank, well, it won't work for 2 reasons. Actually 3. First of all, it's a gasoline pump and it will likely be damaged by the diesel fuel. Second, well, it puts out way too much pressure. And the third reason is, well, this stuff is all junk and it's caked with rust and old bad fuel. So it looks like we won't be able to use the original fuel pump. Now, we can use some of the parts from the original fuel system, for instance this gasket, which should work fine. And of course this big nut that holds the fuel pump in place, it'll definitely come in handy. I reckon the rest of the stuff we'll have to build ourselves. So for the fuel level sensor, we're going to be using this stainless steel marine unit, and it even comes with a fuel gauge and instructions. Today we're going to just focus on the basics and we'll deal with the electrical stuff in another video. So to fill the big hole on top of the fuel tank, I made this cover from 6061 aluminum, and it kind of holds everything together as well. This 3D printed spacer, well, it's to hold the tank gasket in place, and without this, the gasket would likely leak. And the 2 of these parts fit together like this. These bulkhead bushings are what we're going to be using to pass through the aluminum plate, and we're going to be using these special washers to prevent any leaks, and they go together like this. To attach the fuel lines, we're going to be using compression couplings, and as you can see, these couplings fit on both sides. One side is for the fuel line, of course, and the other side is for the fuel pickup. Let me assemble all this stuff off camera and we'll install it in the fuel tank. First we have to install the gasket, then we can install the rest of this gizmo. Now, at first glance, this looks like it's going to work out pretty good. However, I do have some concerns, and it's possible that the fuel level sending unit and the pickup tubes could puncture this tank if it got hit hard enough. I think for today we'll be fine, and I'll redesign this setup with parts that can easily be crushed if the tank were bumped hard enough, but that's a problem for another day. Now, these 2 pipes connect to the fuel filler pipe and are what causes the fill thingy at the gas station pump to automatically shut off. We're going to be hooking them up, but they likely won't work, and that's because the diesel nozzle at the filling station won't fit this car, and we'll have to use a funnel in order to top off the tank. Not a big deal. I don't reckon this car will use that much fuel to make it an issue. Okay, putting the tank in the car is pretty much straightforward, and we'll do that off camera. So on the diesel-powered Saturn, we use this electric fuel pump, and this guy works perfectly, but I've never been able to get it to stop leaking. You know, it leaks a few drops a day, but that's just too much. Perhaps this will be Plan B. Anyway, Plan A is we're going to be using this mechanical lift pump that was designed for this engine. Now, it's an aftermarket pump and costs $22, which seems kind of cheap. And after buying it, I got curious and checked the reviews. The good news is it'll likely work right out of the box, but it may fail in a month or so. So Plan C is to use this pump initially and then source a genuine and more reliable Kubota pump. Ah, geez, look at my hands. I have to be at my brother's house for Thanksgiving dinner in about an hour. Well, I hope they don't mind that I smell like diesel fuel. Maybe I'll wash my hands and put on a clean shirt. I'm hungry. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me today and getting some stuff done, and I'll see you next time. Until then.